Welcome and welcome back, everybody, to the OK Grognard Show. It is Monday, February 21st, 2022, 10 a.m. Central in beautiful Lake Geneva, Wisconsin. It's 10 after, isn't it? Who's late? What's up with that? It's been a long, long weekend, my friends. It was a release weekend for the new Magic the Gathering set, Kamigawa Neon Dynasty, and it is already proven to be a very popular set, and it is a very exciting set. And Jason needed some time off, so I'm picking up a shift today and adding some extra duties. He said duty. Duties. That's multiple. Just adding some extra things I gotta take care of when he's not around. So a little busier than normal, and it's beating the old man up. So I'm walking kind of slow today. Fortunately, I don't have to go until 3, so that's easy enough. And the store's closed tomorrow, so what could possibly go wrong? Nothing. Like Geneva Games. Great place, a lot of fun. A lot of, there were a lot of random people wanting to just use the tables and play games this weekend. It was I mean, we run regular events and we have some regular people that come in almost on a weekly basis that regularly play board games or card games or RPGs, whatever, miniatures, war games, and but we had a number of small groups of people that just wanted to use the space and play games. So it was nice to have a lot more activity. It actually makes things go faster. Doesn't make them go any easier. The bones still feel the long hours. But a couple of quick announcements, I guess, before we go too much further. GM's Day coming up March 4th. Always a good time if you have a regular GM. If you know people that run games for you, and it doesn't even have to be D&D or RPGs. Let's not forget referees, game masters, dungeon masters, storytellers, all of those things fall into one. And that includes people that run referee war games or who teach board games for everybody. Game masters are tabletop gaming wide. And that's not a I'm a big man joke. So definitely take care of a few people that have been running games for you. GM's Day, March 4th for GM's Day. Gary used to even approved of it. There's a thread on EN World where it was brought up to him and he thought it was a capital idea. And then in 2008, it was actually the day on which he passed. So we used the day, which had been a kind of a quasi holiday for 12 years before he passed. No, not 12, like 6. I think it was 2002. This might be the 20th anniversary of GM's Day this year. I'm going to have to look that up. It might well be. In any event, take care of your game masters. And what else is coming up? Late March, barely a month away, just over, GaryCon will be happening. So get ready if you haven't already signed up for events. I think this Saturday is the last wave of event grabbing getting started. So silver badges, astral badges, I think is the online equivalent because there's a virtual GaryCon concurrent with the physical GaryCon. Enjoy them both. Enjoy them separately, whatever makes it possible for you to enjoy it. Either way, it's going to be a blast. I know I'm running some games, first edition game, civilization game, a game of divine right, the usuals that I like to run. And I'll probably get involved in one or more extracurricular games that where I'm just playing. Although maybe not a ton of that, because I'm going to see how stuff gets signed up, how quickly stuff gets filled. I know they're concerned about capacity. I know they're trying to be somewhere around half of what they were expecting to be at around this time because of COVID protocols, mask policies, that sort of thing. Currently, masks will be required. They are requiring proof of vaccination or a very recent negative test for you to be within the facilities during GaryCon. So heads up on that. Uh, I'm I'm double vaxxed and boosted myself. So, and I just got these freebie tests that you could sign up and get through the post office, which is good. It's good to have some quick tests on hand. I may take one right after GaryCon just to be sure I didn't walk out of there with something. I don't know. Depends on the symptoms, right? What is today all about? Today is all about the Advanced Dungeons and Dragons First Edition Dungeon Masters Guide section on use of miniature figures in your game. With the game is actually what it says in the book. Yeah, let's have a look at it. There it is. I looked over this section once before as part of a larger video, but there's some specific things in here that have changed over the years that I think it's interesting to look back at this in isolation in a shorter single video dedicated to it. So let's dive in. Use of miniature figures with the game. The special figures cast for Advanced Dungeons and Dragons add color to play and make refereeing far easier. Each player might be required to furnish painted figures representing his or her player character and all henchmen and or hirelings included in the game session. We'll take this a chunk at a time because uh, there's no game requirement that you use miniatures. I've always used miniatures because, well, that's not true. Sometimes I don't, but that's the departure. Um, I was a wargamer before D&D even came out, and it said right on the book, first of all, they were thinking that this was a kind of an offshoot of war games when they first came up with D&D anyway. And using miniature figures just, of course you would. Why wouldn't you have representational pieces on a tabletop so that you could look at things and strategize and use tactics during combat and figure things out more easily? Of course you've got miniature figures. But we always used them in our games if for no other reason than just to represent the marching order. There'll be some of that talk in this section of the book. But you don't have to. If you are evocative enough as a game master, dungeon master, to draw in people's minds what they are seeing, if you're able to describe that. And that's what DMs are, really, right? You are the eyes and ears and sense of smell and sense of taste into the setting you create for your players. You are their conduit. You are a facilitator of all that can be seen, heard, smelled, tasted, touched. You are their senses to your setting. And you are also the arbiter hopefully, in most cases, neutral arbiter of consequences to the actions they propose that their characters will take. So when you're running combats and stuff, sometimes it's a lot easier to be able to see where things are and not have to describe moment by moment how somebody moved slightly to get behind a barrel and hide or whatever. Anyway, I'll continue a little bit. Oh, and furnish painted figures representing his or her player character and all henchmen or hirelings included in the game session. It may well be that, and I see this a lot nowadays, that players will go out and search for a figure for their character and maybe pick some things up for the game for the DM to use because there's a sort of a collective mentality of uh, curating a collection of miniatures for play. And I think that's great. But in the early days, I recall most DMs bore the bore on their backs the preponderance of figure collecting and supplement buying and all of that, such as it is. Each player might be required to do that. And such distinctively painted figures, oh yeah, and painted. Pre-painted's good if you don't paint yourself, so don't worry about that. Such distinctively painted figures enable you to immediately recognize each individual involved. Figures can be placed so as to show their order of march, i.e., which characters are in the lead, which are in the middle, and which are bringing up the rear. Furthermore, players are readily able to visualize their array and plan actions while seeing the reason for your restrictions on their actions. Oh, that's where the pit is? That's why you're not going to run forward? Monster figures are likewise most helpful, as many things become instantly apparent when a party is arrayed and their monster opponents placed. Furnishing such monsters is probably best undertaken as a joint effort. The whole group contributing towards the purchase of figurines on a regular basis. Be careful to purchase castings which are in scale. Out of scale monsters are virtually worthless in many cases. I don't know if I agree with that. As a rule of thumb, HO scale is 25 millimeter equals 1 actual inch equals 6 feet in scale height or length or breadth. We're going to get more into scaling on this in a moment. What's up, George? How you doing there, Sarah? Thanks for stopping by today. The scale creep is real. That is to say, over the years, miniatures have become larger. It's easy to sculpt larger figures. There are people that play war games where they have stands of figures, and they'll have 3 or 4 or 5 or 10 figures on a stand, a base the size of a domino. And I know dominoes come in different sizes, right? Let's say 1 inch by 2.5 inches. And figures for war games can be 25s, can be 15 millimeters, can be 10. I've seen games played with 6 millimeter figures all arrayed on little stands, and the paint jobs on those is 3 quick colors on there just to, oh, that's the pants, those are the blades, the sword blades, oh, the horse should be brown, boom, boom, boom. That's as good as you're going to get with something that tiny unless you take forever to do it. But 25 millimeter has crept up mostly to 28 by the 1990s through the 18 or 1980s, and then on up to 32 millimeter heroic scale. So things were getting larger and larger, but even by the 80s, 28 millimeter was more the general scale that was being used for figures. The idea that these aren't just representational and have to be exactly to scale. I don't buy that. I like having rubber spiders from the dollar store used to represent giant spiders. Sure, I'm saying they're really, really big, and I use things about the size of a bottle cap on occasion when I want to represent serious battle spiders. But this is what the players are picturing in their mind. If I'm describing and not using miniatures, and I say something's giant, and even if I give a scale, even if I say the body's 10 feet across, somebody's picturing the abdomen, somebody's picturing the thorax, somebody's picturing how wide the jaw is extended, somebody's including the legs. You're getting different ideas of what 10 feet across means when you say giant. So there's nothing wrong with throwing out a figure that's off scale and letting the players' imaginations run wild. Let them believe that their characters are seeing something much larger than it actually is. And that's fine. Anyway, use what you want to use. Then, oh, I could change this. Let me do this real quick because then I can fix the scrolling on this so we get it just right. The scaling, switching to 28 millimeter for the most part, equaling 5 feet. So imagine that. You're changing from an inch being 6 feet for a character's height and representing a 25 millimeter scaled creature or human, or let's say human for the sake of clarity, and then going to 5-foot squares and having 28 millimeters represent a 6-foot tall. And how does that become average anyway? But there you go, right? To continue, let's do this. Let's read a bit more and then we'll talk about it. Figure bases are necessarily broad in order to assure that the figures will stand in the proper position and not constantly be falling over. Because of this, it is usually necessary to use a ground scale twice that of the actual scale for HO, and squares of about 1 actual inch per side are suggested. So far, we're good. Each ground scale inch can then be used to represent 3.5 linear feet. So a 10-foot wide scale corridor is actually 3 inches in width and shown as 3 separate squares. Okay. Well, early days, it was easy enough to still get gridded, square-lined, large sheets from office supply stores or teacher supply stores. So even before Chessex mats or battle mats or any of that sort of thing came out, you could get something that had a 1-inch scale, or just draw it with with a yardstick and a pencil on a big piece of paper. Wrapping paper was readily available for a lot of people because there was some left over from the holidays. Uh, and often, or sometimes, those things did actually have a grid already on them. In any event, this all gets really confusing. When it gets simplified to 28 millimeter becomes 6 feet, a 6-foot tall. And then if you lay it down, you realize it goes outside of a 5-foot square. It's easy to say that a 1-inch square is a 5-foot square representationally, and then 2. And then we're not in this 3 abreast fighting in a 10-foot wide corridor, but rather looking at just a couple of figures, which to my mind, always made more sense anyway, because if I'm swinging a sword, I'm certainly not just swinging it or thrusting with it all the time. I'm definitely using it to swing, whether it's down, even if it's just down, it's there's some follow through. So you got to figure you need a little more room than 3.5 feet or 3 1/3, really, right? Which is what they actually do say here, not 3.5. In any event, as they say in the article, or as Gary says, this allows depiction of a typical array of 3 figures abreast, and I don't think that's typical, and also enables easy handling of such figures when they are moved. While you may not find it convenient to actually use such figures and floor plans to handle routine dungeon movement, having sheets of squares for encounter area depiction will probably be quite helpful. If you do so, be certain to remember that the ground scale differs from figure scale, and when dealing with length, 2 man-sized figures per square is quite possible, as the space is actually 6 scale feet with respect to length. This is meaningful when attacking a snake, dragon, etc., if characters are able to attack the creature's body length. With respect to basically bipedal, erect opponents, scale will not be a factor. Details of preparation and painting of miniature figures for the game are not germane to this work, the Dungeon Master's Guide. Your hobby supplier will have an assortment of small brushes and paints for such purposes, and you may inquire as to the best techniques of painting. Well, there you go. Perhaps one of the more fun parts of the hobby for some people, collecting the figures and painting them, is kind of backburnered there in a couple of sentences at the end of that section, um, which is strange because I know that all of these guys collected and bought. I don't think and painted miniatures when they had to or when they wanted to. I don't think there was much in the way of guidance regarding miniature painting and model building and that sort of thing until we get into oh, what's the name of the supplement? Battle something in second edition. They had the miniatures battle. Of course, you had chainmail and you had rules for using the miniatures and sword and sorcery, right? Or those various supplements. But until you had that larger tome. But as Sarah is pointing out in the chat, nowadays there are a million videos on painting miniatures. There are so many channels devoted to miniatures painting, crafting of terrain, dungeon tiles, maps. I think this is part of the reason why mapping in game has gone kind of by the wayside, because there's so many ways to handle it now that are faster and more convenient, so you can spend less time on administration and bookkeeping and bookwork and drawing if you don't want to. Now, I've run plenty of first edition campaigns where people still like to use a caller, somebody to kind of be the player's representative for most actions in the game until you get into we need to know exactly what this person or that person or this person is doing. And somebody would be the map maker, the cartographer at the table as you were going through a dungeon or even out of doors and keep track of everything that way. And that was all good. I think that was a way of handling it that doesn't happen much anymore, but was still one fun part of the game. But this is about miniatures use, so I don't want to get too far afield. And I do want to say that I enjoy using them. I think when I use them in the games that I play, I think people that play in the games that I run enjoy that I use them. Um, But that is not to say it can't be done in a theater of the mind style. I've done it from time to time, and it's a lot of fun that way too. People enjoy that. I see less combat when I do theater of the mind style games, and it may be that having miniatures on a grid kind of guides people, steers people toward more combat. Throwing monsters certainly helps to create more combat every 5 feet they move. But I guess the only point being is do what you wish. This is how they described doing it in first edition and how they were doing it since original D&D. Um, I don't think you see a lot of direct advice for theater of the mind style of play until maybe second edition comes along. It becomes, you know what? In some of the basic books, I think they discuss it to some degree too. So do as you like, enjoy it, have fun. I think we'll cut it short a little bit today. It's not too short really, and just say thank you very much. Oh, well, no, hang on. Let's take a second here. Maw Deeps, new viewer. Thank you, first time chatter. Really? He says, first time, I play on a VTT and find it easier to get a group that way. It never occurred to me that using more theater of the mind would result in less combat. Interesting. And just as a kind of a general percentage, Maudeeps, let me ask this of you. What percentage of, when playing at a table, not on a virtual tabletop, but physically in person over the course of your gaming career, let's call it, what percentage have you done mostly theater of the mind, and what percentage have you done mostly using miniatures and the tabletop, maybe a grid, something to represent? And we don't have to get into the specifics of how we move the pieces around the chessboard or we don't. But if you could give me some idea of what you've done more of so that I can get an idea when you say this about virtual tabletop gaming, if it's a translation from the tabletop itself or if it is something you've done mainly as, well, I just started during the pandemic. Okay, there you go. One shot on an actual tabletop. A 99, I'd say, is using a VTT. Yeah, okay. And let me follow up then and ask, because you say virtual tabletop, and I think I'm right in assuming from that you're implying that you use something like Roll20 or Fantasy Grounds or D&D Beyond or something that does use grids and does use tokens to represent the player characters, as opposed to some people that play on. Sorry about that. Some people that play online and do only use Zoom or Discord and use no kind of whiteboard or virtual tabletop, but only Roll20 for you. Okay. Yeah, most of my virtual tabletop experience is using Roll20 along with a Discord voice chat because at the beginning of the pandemic, the Roll20 voice component wasn't really fully developed yet, or maybe they were just rolling it out at that point. Um, but I have played a few games uh, where we played in Zoom and didn't use any kind of representational, and there wasn't a lot of combat I noticed in that as well. So I'm wondering if it is again the medium that you're using that kind of promotes a certain style of play. And this was a game I've played with Tim Kask a couple of times, early editor of the original D&D booklets, and then Dragon Magazine. And when I played with him in person, it was like a Tower of Gygax scenario where it was just some people play for an hour, some people get out of the way, some people, and it was a constant churn of combat, and it was all on the tabletop with miniatures and with a grid. And then when I played with him online, we played via Zoom in his what's his scenario called? Wheel of Blame. That's it. And you give him two nouns: person, places, things, whatever, and he incorporates them into a kind of a free-form improv D&D session. And there was some combat in that. Make no mistake, it wasn't completely sans combat, but it wasn't a lot of it. Most of it was kind of our characters in a room. It's more like our characters were in escape room scenarios where we had to figure out this trap or that trap or this puzzle or that puzzle, with some occasional combat slipped in on top of it. And I'm wondering if that is possible, that that's partially promoted by the means by which you are playing, whether it's a virtual tabletop or if we're sitting around. I remember some of the theater of the mind games that I played in over the years. Um, we wouldn't even have a table in front of us. There might be a coffee table and a more of a living room, couches and chairs sort of setting, and people would just sit back and relax and talk through the scenarios that they were doing. And there'd be a coffee table there, but you'd have a pizza on it and drinks and whatnot, and no grid, no miniatures. Whereas, obviously, if you're playing using in person using a grid, you kind of need to have a table and people sitting up near a table so they can move their figures or see what's going on and be able to describe their actions even if someone else is moving their figures. So, as Maudie says, we'll do more Theater of the Mind next session, and might help me build my skills at describing a room scenario, etc. Yeah, probably. I would think anything that you would have drawn, a picture's worth 1,000 words. So every picture you don't draw will require another 1,000 spoken words to bring it to life, I suppose. So maybe that's a truism. I do have to cut it short though. I got a couple things to do beyond the day before I go into the game store, Lake Geneva Games. If you're ever in the gaming mecca, the birthplace of D&D, do stop by Lake Geneva Games and check it out. It's a good little place. And thank you all very much, Maudeeps, Sarah, George, everybody, for popping in, for chatting, for checking out the show. And hopefully we'll see you next week as well. This will be uploaded to YouTube if you want to double check it or check it out again if you didn't see the whole thing later. Then you'll get a chance. So, let me say a few things by way of goodbye, which includes it was nice to have a little talk in the Advanced Dungeons and Dragons First Edition Dungeon Masters Guide section on use of miniature figures. Show streams live on Twitch each Monday, 10 a.m. Central, and is then archived on YouTube. If you're on Twitch, by all means follow the channel and chime in on the chat and join the conversation. If you can check it out later on YouTube, please give us a thumbs up, subscribe to the channel, and click the little bell so you get updates whenever a new episode is uploaded. And also, feel free to leave comments, whether it's on theme or just about the show in general. It'll be appreciated. Thanks to our Patreon supporters. Links are provided in the show notes. Tom Tullis of Fat Dragon Games, Rick Hershey of Fat Goblin Games, Carlos Lysing of Castle Entertainment, Heath Farndon of the Antipede and D20, and of course, DM extraordinaire, Shane Bradley. The OK Grognard Show brought to you in part by Creative Mountain Games. Remember, original plus advanced. It's the way to go. This has been the OK Grognard Show from beautiful Lake Geneva, Wisconsin. Bye-bye.